Hey everybody, my name is Quinn, and for my project, I chose to present on the hypodermic needle theory, which was credited to Harold Lasswell in the 1920s and 30s. It's sometimes called the magic bullet theory as well. It refers to the idea that the media can basically, quote unquote, inject specific ideas and ideologies into the general public through their publications. It assumes that the audience is a passive, like-minded group that is really easily malleable by pretty much all forms of media that they consume. The theory suggests that media messages are immediately received and fully accepted by the audience. It's lost a lot of relevance due to it being so cut and dry, but I believe it's still applicable to an extent in the current day, and I'll explain why in a little bit. It was one of the earliest ways to think about our relationship to the media, and it was mainly spurred due to the effects of propaganda during the aftermath of World War I in the 1920s and 30s, and the use of mass media and propaganda by the Nazis just a few years before, as well as the impact of Hollywood at the time, were some of the main driving factors behind its creation. Now, the TV wasn't invented yet. It was invented in 1927, actually the same year that Lasswell's book Propaganda Technique in the World War in the World War was published, which introduced a new form of media broadcasting, which means that all of Lasswell's research had been done prior to the invention of the television, so it had no influence on his original statements, but it certainly altered how the theory was perceived in the years to come. He studied Nazi propaganda movies to see how they persuaded the public to subscribe to their ideology and secure their support for Hitler's atrocities. And sometime later, Max Horkheimer and Theodor Adorno, who were both German expats, began noticing the similarities between Nazi propaganda and Hollywood, which they called the culture industry of America. They compared the messages being delivered by pop culture to manufacturing standardized messages designed to manipulate people. They also noted that the ideas being promoted by the industry arose needs that only capitalism could sate, and therefore, their conclusion was that the purpose of the culture industry was to promote capitalism and consumerism amongst their audience. And it was also popularized based on the events like Orson Welles' War of the Worlds broadcast. I apologize that my face is covering some of the pictures, but I'm sure you can see it still. In 1938, a while after the theory had already been created, Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater broadcast a fictional dramatization of H.G. Wells, who has no relation to Orson Welles, H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. And in it, Wells said that strange beings landed in a field in Jersey in Grover Mills, and that they were the vanguard of an invading force from Mars. He said that 7,000 soldiers fought against a single machine from Mars, and only 120 survived. It was presented in the format of a news bulletin, and it swept the nation by storm. The New York Times claimed that thousands of people were affected by the mass hysteria it caused. And before this incident, the hypodermic needle theory existed and was believed by many, but this broadcast was another incident that supported it. Another example of the prevalence of this theory is this research project, an experiment done to test the solidity of the theory. And this is the Bobo doll experiment in the early 1960s, and I actually found a picture that fits the experiment. These pictures were taken from the experiment. And in the experiment, there were 4 groups of children. One group was shown a real example of someone beating a doll with a mallet. One was shown a cartoon version of the same thing. One was shown a film, and the last one was shown no violence at all. And then all the children were grouped together into a room filled with toys, and they were told that they were not allowed to play with the toys, and this made them frustrated. Afterwards, they were brought into another room and not given any instructions. And the children who had viewed the violence, whether it was real or not, decided to emulate what they had seen. The children who had seen nothing did nothing to the doll. This experiment seemed to indicate that children tend to emulate what they see in the media. On the surface, events like these can make it seem like the media has a powerful effect on society as a whole. But for example, there were still millions of people who viewed the Wells broadcast that night and they didn't believe it at all. The main criticisms that are brought up against it take issue with the fact that the theory states that we are all essentially the same. It assumes that people are easily influenced by the media and that we consume, and we are all equally able to be controlled by it to some extent. Studies have also been done. Oh, my apologies. I forgot to switch to that. Yeah, studies have also been done to challenge the basis of a theory, such as the one presented by Paul Felix Lazarsfeld, Hazel Gaudet, and Bernard Berelson in the 1940s, which used Franklin D. Roosevelt's election. They analyzed the relationship between political power and social media, and they discovered that interpersonal outlets were much more potent than Roosevelt's media propaganda. The research indicated that while the messages from the media had some effect, the voters were not as helpless and as gullible as they would suggest. And in my opinion, the overabundance of media forms and outlets that exist in the current day can also play a large role as to why the theory isn't as popular now as it was when it was first originated. I do think that it's evolved a lot over time, though. And while things were never quite as black and white as was originally hypothesized, some truth still exists in it. While the media may not have the power to directly inject us with ideas and beliefs, we are instead kind of tailoring our own media experiences. All news outlets and social media platforms have different ways of presenting their content, and we as consumers pick and choose what we want to consume and believe. For example, a viewer of Fox News is getting very different inputs than a viewer of CNN. The type of media that they choose to consume probably reinforces the views that they already had, and they are therefore injecting themselves with certain ideas and certain information. Even in non-news related media, such as social media platforms like Instagram and TikTok, are tailored to your personal viewing preferences through their algorithm. What you watch is what you get more of, and the same ideologies are being presented over and over again, reinforcing the same ideas. Overall, I think it's important to study and to know about theorems such as the hypodermic needle theorem, even though they aren't as prevalent now as they used to be, because it can help us learn about past events, and we can base our future on their successes and their failures. Even if the original idea isn't prevalent in our culture today, it's still interesting to see how ideas can evolve over time and what the future might hold for us. These are my sources, and thank you for listening to my presentation.